Welcome to the Mouse Bytes podcast. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to Mouse Bytes, the show all about Disney video games, past and present. I'm your host, Clay, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Jeph. Hello, Jeph.
Well, hello, Clay.
How are you, good sir?
I'm doing quite well. How about yourself?
I cannot complain. I am doing well. It's a good Saturday. The weather is finally broke, and it's working the way it should be. I don't know about you, but It's beautiful here, so...
Yeah, we finally hit 70.
Woo! Nice.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, things are good. Just saw Avengers last week, so I guess that's kind of Disney themed, so...
Yeah.
I'm not going to say which Avengers, just to not, date the show, but
right,
I saw a Avengers movie,
Oh, one of the many.
Right, of course. But anyways, I was trying to think of like some witty way to kind of introduce this game before we jump in. But to be honest, I don't know. It's a game that I've actually wanted to cover on the show. I'm glad that we're finally doing it.
Yeah.
Because I haven't played a whole lot of it up to now. So
yeah.
Unless there's anything important you need to tell me before we get started.
Well, certainly this is the precursor to God of War in that series, right?
Oh, that's why we did this, because we totally timed this up with the new God of War game coming out, and so...
I mean, possibly, it could be God of War, or it could be another game.
Right, no.
Trying to not date the episode.
Something like God of War.
Yeah, some sort of new action-adventure game just came out, I'm sure.
Yes.
For all of you.
So for all you PlayStation lovers out there, this week we are talking about Hercules Action Game. Well, bless my soul, Hercules is on a roll and made a game called Hercules Action Game. That's actually the title, for whatever reason.
Yeah, what a weird title.
We've already covered games on this show where it's literally just the title of the movie or whatever. Yeah. And, Brave. It was just literally called Brave. But for some reason they wanted to I guess differentiate this between. There might be maybe there's a point and click Hercules game out there or something. So they wanted this to be different. But
yeah,
not the most stellar title. But we won't hold it against them, right?
Absolutely not.
So, starting off, we'd like to talk about what the heck this game is. So, if you're listening and you're not familiar with Hercules Action Game, we could try to kind of jog your memory or paint a picture for you. So, Jeph, if you'd be so kind to do that now.
Sure. So, Disney's Hercules Action Game, or as it's known in Europe with the even better title, Disney's Action Game, featuring Hercules, is a platform game for the PlayStation and Windows. It's based on the animated film, obviously, of not the same name. It says the same name, but it's just Hercules. It was released about a week prior to the film's release here in the U.S. And then later that fall, fall, November of '97, in Europe. So it also had a version for Game Boy, which is a little bit different.
Right.
But it was published by Virgin Interactive in the U.S., Sony Computer Entertainment in Europe, and then on Windows it was just published by Disney, or Disney Interactive. Let's see. So, yeah, developed by Eurocom. This is the same team, I'm pretty sure, that went on to do Tarzan, which is a show that we covered earlier in this series. So right. There's a lot of parallels with that, and we'll discuss those as we go through it. The PlayStation version of the game did get a re-release a year later when they updated the ESRB ratings from the kids to adults, the KA, that originally launched with that rating system in 1994. And it was updated to an E rating, which I'll be honest, I considering there's decapitation and animated blood, I'm surprised it's not rated teen. But, who am I to say that? I guess the movie should have been PG and it was G. So what can you do? We weren't as uptight as a society back then, apparently.
That's true.
It was also re-released on the PlayStation Digital Store for PS3 and Vita in 2011 as a PS1 classic. So that was their emulated streaming service or something, or just emulated service. I think it wasn't streaming. But I've never utilized that service. Have you ever utilized that service?
I have not. No.
Okay. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's sort of along the lines of the Virtual Console or the Xbox backwards compatibility program.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that covers it. I don't know if you had anything else with what the heck the game was, but I think that's a pretty good summation of it.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit everything other than kind of what the game itself is as far as
that's true
gameplay. But
yeah, I missed that
point. Which is more what this segment was kind of thought for. But that's okay. That's why we have co-hosts, right?
Absolutely.
We get each other's back. So it's a side-scrolling action platformer. Maybe not so much platformer. Maybe just
there's a good amount of it.
You jump around, but there's not. I don't know.
I guess you're right. You're right.
There is some platforming parts, but it's more just climbing on things and jump and like slashing your sword at things.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
It does have some moments where you can change. I don't know what you call it, like the plane that you're on or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, it is kind of 2D. It's not, you're thinking PlayStation. Oh, it's probably 3D. Not really. This is more a side scroller, kind of more old school, I guess. But they do some really interesting things with it. So we will be talking more about that. But I think overall that's kind of really all there is to it. There are some other levels that do the screen scrolling a little bit differently, but for the most part, it's kind of left to right kind of thing. So.
Yeah.
But we can talk more about that later. Next up, we'd like to mention before we jump in any history we might have with the game. I'll go ahead and start off. I've only barely played this a little bit up until recently. I remember my cousins had this game when I was a kid, and so maybe a time or two when I was over at their house, I was able to play it or watch them play it. So I remember it, but never owned it, and always thought it looked really cool. I even remember back then watching them playing and go, wow, like that looks really neat. And at that point, I had seen the movie and was a big fan of the movie, so that probably helped me, be even more excited about it. But really didn't get a hold of this game until recently. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I ordered a copy on eBay and had it sent here, and was able to play it on a PS2 actually. And so
nice.
This was my first time being able to play through it more or less in its entirety. So it's pretty new to me. What about you?
Yeah, as usual, I didn't play it growing up. At the time, I was definitely very much a Nintendo kid and didn't have a PlayStation. So I just didn't even have the opportunity to, whereas some of the other games we've covered, I just kind of missed out. I do definitely remember when it came out. I remember seeing maybe a commercial or a promotion for it and footage of the Hydra fight, and just being blown away by it because, it's not to say that like the Nintendo 64 and some other 3D systems weren't out at the time, but like we'll discuss it when we get to it. But like the Hydra fight is very visually impressive, especially for 1997.
Oh yeah.
So I do vaguely remember the marketing of the game and being interested in it, but again, not having any way to play it. I didn't really become a PC gamer till a couple years later. So
yeah. And with me, like I think I jumped into the PlayStation a little bit late. I think I remember when I was a kid, I didn't think it was very cool. I thought the name was kind of silly. It sounded childish to me.
Right.
And but eventually I was like, oh, actually, it's pretty cool. Plus, like, I've just always had a history of not liking the new console on the block. I didn't like the PlayStation at first. I really didn't like the Xbox.
I was the same way, honestly. Yeah.
I was like, Microsoft shouldn't be doing video games. Get out of here. What do you think you're doing? Like, and just so some of those I ended up jumping on the the bandwagon or whatever late just because I was a little turned off by it. But
Yep, same.
luckily that doesn't happen as much anymore, so it's
not for me.
a common thing. So
Yeah.
but all right. Anything else?
Nope, that's pretty much it. I literally, and I didn't play it any time between when I was a kid or now. I played it for research for this episode for the first time.
Cool. Right on. All right. Well, that kind of ends our first part of the show. And so now we're going to jump real deep into this game with our gameplay discussion. So here we go. All right, so now that we are to the gameplay discussion part of our show, we're going to hit on visuals, audio, gameplay difficulty. We'll probably quickly talk through the levels, the story, all that stuff, and then give our final thoughts. So this is the meat and potatoes of the episode. So hold on tight, guys, because it's about to get educational up in here with all this Greek mythology. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so starting us off is the visuals. This is probably one of the bigger, stronger, more fun to talk about parts of this game. So let's jump right in. Jeff, what are your thoughts on the visuals?
Just right off the bat, I really like the visuals of this game. It uses a combination of 2D sprites and 3D rendered geometry, but with like the texturing and visual style of the film like to the T. And again, like kind of, I keep saying this, but like for the time, it looks really great for a 1997 PS1 game. And I think a lot of that is from the texturing and the art direction. The animation is very strong. It's either extracted from the movie or had to have been done by like Disney themselves. The 3D objects, while a lot of them are kind of low polygon, so they kind of look blocky. Again, the proper use of the texturing and kind of the art style of the backgrounds of the movie, so kind of those swirly trees and painterly rocks and stuff like that, really give it a visual identity that works and has aged well, in my opinion. And then just a lot of the plane moving and all of that like works well. So like you're in a 3D environment where you can kind of move forward and backward, which you kind of mentioned earlier. There's a few points where it doesn't really work. Some of the scrolling levels that you were talking to, the Rush style Crash Bandicoot levels, kind of struggle because of the 2D objects going through the 3D plane constantly. I think it kind of makes it hard to figure out your space as a 3D figure because you are a 2D character, and then a lot of the things interacting with you are 2D, so it makes it hard. But overall, love it. What are your thoughts on the visuals?
Yeah, so starting off, as a kid, I remember watching this, like I mentioned, my cousin blew my mind. It was great to still see there be these 2D action games, because really at the time it was all about 3D and polygons, and so side scrollers weren't really popular and there wasn't a whole lot going on. So seeing this was actually, kind of great for me. I was kind of stoked about it. Jeff, I know on the show we've talked about this before, where we're trying to figure out, like sometimes I think it was with Mickey Speedway, what is a 2D sprite and what is, a 3D polygon. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like hard to tell. And so my time playing this game this week, I just was constantly trying to figure out what was what. And eventually I kind of had to stop because like some of this I can't tell. And I was just like trying to figure it out too much, and I was like, no, just enjoy the game. It looks good. It maybe hasn't aged as well, and me putting my PS2 on my big screen, LCD,
right?
Not gonna
pixelated,
look the best.
Yeah.
And so there is that, but overall I think it's still just really cool to look at. I think they did a lot of fun things. There's all kinds of like, when you break things, little pieces flying everywhere, and it just really, I don't know, it's really immersive. There's times where when you're going between the foreground, background, they have like bushes and things, and you just like can't see everything, and you're like, oh, there's things hiding behind the bush that are gonna kill me, and it gets a little frustrating at times.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think it works really well. I agree with you. The animations, as with most Disney games that we've been covering, just do a really good job. And so I really like that. I'm trying to think what else visually here. Like you said, everything feels very to the source material.
Yeah.
Like all the circles everywhere, circles on the rocks, circles on the trees.
The swirlies is what I've always called them.
Swirlies. Yeah. And so they've got that down. Oh yeah, here's another big one. Since this is a PlayStation and PC exclusive, never came to the N64. We were gifted with some video cutscenes straight from the film.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, as a kid or an adult, whatever, at this time, it's pretty cool to get clips from the movie. Maybe you just saw it a couple weeks ago, and you're like, oh, I get to see little clips from the movie, and so they kind of spliced them together. Sometimes they would kind of cut things out to keep the story moving along. Even in the same cutscene, they would like cut different things out, which was whatever. It was fine. But honestly, they bothered me a lot less than the cutscenes we saw in Tarzan, because they like took Rosie O'Donnell's voice out and had to put somebody else in. And as far as I could tell with this one, all the voicing in the cutscenes is. And I know I'm getting to the audio part, but
that's okay.
Yeah, just it
I
all
think it was all
really
the original.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I would assume in game too. So
it seemed like it.
Yeah, and for some reason I had in my head that Danny DeVito didn't do this game, but I guess he did. Maybe I'm thinking of Kingdom Hearts.
Kingdom Hearts.
Very almost pretty obviously he was not part of that one, but
yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, overall, I think that's great. I think the front, I don't know, the levels where you're running forward and you're kind of looking at Hercules from behind. I agree with you. I think there is some kind of like depth issues and kind of telling where things are, but it's still kind of like a cool effect.
Yeah.
In the level where you're running toward Cyclops. And he's just kind of like, even though it's like a really long level, and I'm getting ahead here again.
Yeah. That's good.
You're just constantly running toward him, and he just is always in the foreground. And I don't know. It just, even though it is still kind of a little weird that you're running for like an hour and still really far away. Yeah. But it still was like kind of epic, just seeing him off in the distance, and you're doing this level to get to him. I don't know. So it still, I think, worked pretty well. So maybe the visuals haven't aged as well, but as you mentioned, for their time, I think they did a great job. Yeah. Super colorful, bright, perfectly feels like it's from the movie, part of the movie. The menus and the in-betweens with the muses. I assume that's what they were. Yeah. Kind of have like the potted art style where they have different drawings for each level and stuff. And so everything is just really in tune with the vibe and the whole Greek, vibe that's going on in the game. So the heads-up display gets a little busy at times, but
it does. There's
a lot going on with power-ups and things in this game, weapons. So I understand. I understand that. So. What else you got, Jeph, visually? What else you thinking?
Just one thing to touch on is kind of the character design. So there's several that are taken straight from the movie, like a lot of like the Cyclops, like you mentioned earlier. There's the Titans, and the first boss is the like the Centaur or whatever. But there's several original ones, and I don't know if any of them maybe were taken from, like, I know there was an animated TV show that came out maybe around this time, but like this should precede that. So a lot of original characters that looked good. The art style works for them. No idea if they were designed by Disney or if they were designed by Eurocom or just kind of in tandem. But there's different, like, there's like bull characters that throw rocks at you, and there's these like skeletons that you fight, and like there's a Medusa boss, which is definitely not in the movie. So or if she is, it's in like one like
Yeah, she's
clip in
very
a
briefly
montage,
in it.
right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, but
Yeah.
like she's animated and interactive, and there's a whole sequence, which again I'm getting ahead, but there's just some great character design and movement and animation with the NPC or the enemy characters. There's a little mixture of both. Like in the first level, you mentioned Phil, Danny DeVito's character. Like he kind of follows you along in the background, and it's kind of cool to see him. And he does little moves and dances and helps move stuff, which again. So all those little graphical bells, whistles, and extras are great, and like you said, the particle effects are nice touch, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Like the UI you said is a little busy. It's kind of got your health, a power up, charge up, and then kind of your weapon select, and then the weapon power meter, and it's kind of large, which again is a victim of the resolution of games at this time, because to make it readable at a low res TV, low res output, you had to make them bigger on the screen. Whereas I think like if you were to do an HD remaster of this, you could do those same HUD elements and make them tiny in the corner, and they just wouldn't be as intrusive.
Right.
So anyway, I mean that's nitpicking a little bit with the UI, but it's it's there. It takes up a big chunk of the top of your screen.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and with as far as like enemy types, I think a lot of them work really well. I think there's a few that I'm not a huge fan of. Like there's these random guys that will come at you with like a knife.
Yeah.
And they look like they're somebody's dad. It's like some chubby guy with like a mustache.
Yeah.
Like who is this guy?
Yeah.
Completely
Why does he
want to
kill me? Yeah.
Right. It's just it doesn't like the monsters and the evil bat bird things and that all like feels like it came from Hades, so like it all makes sense, but then all of a sudden there's these human guys that want to kill you, and it's just a little strange. So some of them felt a little more out of place than others.
Yeah, that's true,
but I understand that they had to come up with some variety of enemies, and so sometimes you have to take some liberties, and I get that, but some just worked better than others, I guess. Agreed. I'll say so. So I mean there's probably stuff we're missing visually that we could really be hitting on, but for the most part
touch on that maybe when we go to the levels and think
right
of it,
if we miss anything.
But
really overall I think they did some really cool things in this game, and I think they still get the praise for that. I think that most people who remember these games would still appreciate what they did. So if it feels like we're rushing through that, let it just be stated that I think visually this game is pretty strong. So following up after that is the audio of this game, which I would say personally I think is relatively strong.
Overall I would agree.
I think we would both also agree that it's really close to the source material. Whereas with a lot of games that we've done, they maybe have a song or two from the movie, and then they take the rest are just kind of come from basically nowhere.
Right.
Why don't you go ahead and take over? I feel like I have a sneeze coming on, and I just don't want to be in the middle of a thought when that happens.
Okay, well, preemptively bless you, but
thank you.
So yeah, as you mentioned, the music is from the movie. However, rather than being the actual tracks, which is hard to do in a video game because of the need of dynamic and loopability, they're MIDI and they're orchestrated that way. I don't know. Again, not being a PlayStation kid, I'm not really sure how often MIDI was used over recorded music at the time, since this was kind of the first disc system to really allow that. The MIDI tracks in general are good quality, but there is occasionally times where they use like a weird instrument source and sounds a little older than it should. Not often though. Usually just horns and instruments that sound like that. I noticed. But also there's occasions where the music doesn't really fit with what's happening on screen. It's a little just like lackadaisical and whimsical when it should be a little more upbeat and urgent. I feel like in the Cyclops level, there should be more of a sense of panic, and it just feels like we're on a stroll through the city. But overall, in general, it works. Like through the first level, it's really good, and several of the other levels. And then the use of sound and sound effects. Couple things I noticed is just some overuse of certain things. Your main health replenisher is Herculade, as made famous in the movie. But every single time you pick it up, which is pretty often, he says Herculade, and it's like
Herculade.
I feel like they should have done more of like the sipping a straw with an empty cup, where it's like the something just more subtle. It got a little annoying to me. And I know we keep mentioning the Cyclops level, but like the Cyclops voice, he has like two sayings. He just says them over and over, and like you said, that level is so long, and so it gets annoying.
Definitely.
And then my last one that I noticed was you have to pick up these Hercules letters to spell out the name,
right?
Which again was a trend in Tarzan. So you can see the parallels. But when you collect them, it makes this generic video game sound that was used in Nick Arcade. It was used in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. I'm sure it's been used in millions of things, but it's kind of this doo-doo-doo-doo. But then the muses come on and do this little hum thing, which the first time or two you hear it, it's really cool. But then Hercules is a pretty long word, and so you get that several times per level, and it doesn't have any variation. It gets really annoying to me. I feel like if they could have done there's something that happens in Sea of Thieves, and this is just a really weird tangent, but bear with me here. When you are shooting cannons at another ship, when you make contact with the cannonball on an enemy ship, it plays a sound sting. And then if you make another one, it plays another one. And it essentially progresses through, I don't know if you'd call it chords, but essentially it makes a little song that sounds audibly pleasing. Whereas these muses should have done that, and they're just the exact same sound clip over and over and over. That's just where I was getting with that. It's not horrible, but it just I don't know why there was 2 sound effects needed for that collection. Like, even if it was just the muses, maybe it would be less annoying. I don't know. So those are my big ones. I'm sure there's plenty that you noticed if you want to kind of give your take on the music and the sound.
Yeah, I mean, I agree definitely with the Herculade and the Cyclops guy, where those were really repetitive. The Hercules letters didn't bother me as much.
Okay.
But to be fair, I was terrible at finding those letters.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about that when we get to the levels. But
yeah,
even the first time I played through it, I didn't even find any, and I was like, I got to the end of the level, I'm like, oh, apparently there's that many letters
so
hidden.
well hidden.
Yeah, so I had no idea.
Fair enough. Okay.
And so that one didn't bother me. As far as the music, yeah, it is a bit MIDI heavy, and really it's not terribly inconvenient or awful.
Orchestrated. Yeah,
right. I guess the only issue I had with the music was the fact that some of them felt short. And so, and maybe it's just because I was not progressing through levels at a very good pace, specifically the first level. And so I heard that Phil song over and over, multiple times. And it has a really big finish. It doesn't just kind of loop, and so it'll be da 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 da, bum 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 da da, bow, and then start all over. And I'm just that
was beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. And it's just it's such a big
no, totally.
finish.
You're right.
I'm like, oh, well, that probably means I'm at the end of the level. This is almost it. And there's no, you're not. It's just the song's gonna start over now.
It's a weird choice for them to do that, but it's how do you stay faithful to the song, but also make it loopy? That's the wrong word, but make it loopable for a game. It's a tough trade-off.
Yeah, and so I don't, and I know sometimes when it just keeps going and going, it maybe even feels more repetitive and annoying. So I don't know. I'm not really offering a great solution here. And
my solution is always do a key change and then do a different verse in a different key. It helps so much.
Yeah, just try to add a little variance to it. So yeah. That is a little annoying, but I'll take having songs from the movie over, missing them altogether. I feel certain songs. Okay, good. I feel certain songs weren't as well represented. Hercules' song that he sings, I don't feel that was in this game a whole lot. I Could Go the Distance or whatever. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah. Go the Distance.
There might have been some of it at the end.
Yeah, I don't really remember
last level or
it,
two.
But yeah.
But other than that, there's a lot of the style is very much similar to the music, I guess you could say,
Kinda
where it's
the gospel-ish.
right. And so they definitely played off that, and I think that was smart because that's kind of the underlying tone of the whole movie as far as music goes. It had that going on. So I get that. I think that was fine. The only other thing that stood out to me, and I wasn't a huge fan, but it wasn't long enough to really bother me, the first boss of the first level, the centaur guy, it like turns into this like banjo hee-haw
like Ride 'em Cowboy, which is I get it, there because you have to jump on the boss to do it. But yeah.
But I kind of like raised an eyebrow at that point. I was like,
totally,
really, guys. So other than that, mostly positive stuff, I would say.
Yeah, fair enough.
So there you go, guys. Honestly, pretty strong visually and audibly, I guess. So yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to hit on gameplay and difficulty. So starting us off, there are 10 levels in this game and 3 different difficulty modes: beginner, medium, and Herculean, which I guess is a word. The last 2 difficulties, medium and Herculean, they have 2 levels at the very end of the game that are only playable on those 2 difficulties.
God, I hate when games do that.
Yeah, me too. And in fact, we were texting about it because I'm like, sometimes when you're reviewing games, you don't have time to play through it 3 times.
Right.
And so, and we like to play our games on easy and have a good time.
Especially me.
Yeah. And so it was just kind of frustrating to get to the end, and there's literally a screen at the end that says, if you want to be a true hero, try it on the higher difficulties. And
that's infuriating. That should just be like when you select beginner, it should tell you.
Yeah, and I usually try to look it up because...
Well, yeah, that too.
I mean, even in the last game we did, the Mickey game, it was like practice mode. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound promising.
Right.
And I beat it in 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, wow. All right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand that once, back in the day, if you got a game, that was it. And so maybe it's nice to throw a little incentive to get people to replay the game.
That's true.
After they master. So I see both sides of it. So I was like, okay, I don't want to replay the whole game. But they have a password system where I can just skip to the levels I want to. So I looked them up online. Like, okay, this will be fine. And so I go to the password select screen, and the game kept freezing on me, which was really weird.
Oh, no.
Because I had no issues at all with this game up until this point.
That's random.
It was so weird because the music would like freeze on one note and just keep playing it.
Yep.
But then I kept getting sound clips from the game of like random people, and it'd be like Cyclops cycling through his random lines, and Meg would say things, and I think Zeus would say something.
Wow.
And I couldn't move my cursors. I couldn't move her. And so I was like, well, that's weird. So I reset, tried it again, same thing. So I was like, all right. So I guess that was...
it's an emulation issue, I'm sure, for the PS2. It sounds like a memory management issue with the emulator. I don't really know. I'm definitely not an engineer, but it sounds like it would be related to that.
That would actually make sense.
Yeah.
That it's not like a scratch on the disc. It's more
I doubt it's that. It's probably emulation issue.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So unfortunately I wasn't able to play the 2 additional levels, but honestly, even without the 2 last levels, the additional levels, I still feel like you get a pretty good feel of things. I mean, you don't get to fight Hades, but really other than that, you still feel like you get a relatively full experience with what you get. As far as difficulty goes, you can speak into this too. Honestly, beginner, I felt like was pretty like well placed. I really didn't die until I got to, I think it was Cyclops, just because some of the parts got
There's a lot of characters on screen and it's hard to avoid them. Yeah.
Right, and there's a couple parts where if you don't go to a certain side of screen, you kind of get stuck, and it's hard to get out of it. And so I didn't feel like I really deserved those deaths. But the point is, I really didn't die, and there's plenty of Hercules around.
Yes.
Which I appreciate, because there was some levels where I was taking a lot of damage, and so as it should be, the easy mode had lots of health, and so I enjoyed that. I liked that if you looked around a boss, you could find health to keep yourself in the game. So I really did enjoy it. I'm sure the medium and hard definitely ramp it up, because there are some very unfair bad guy enemy NPCs in this game. And I don't know, maybe you want to talk more about that, but I don't know, what do you think about the difficulty?
Yeah, it's I mostly echo the sentiments that you just mentioned. I myself did only play beginner just because of how I play. So I didn't actually go and do like the medium and Herculean and get those last 2 levels. I just saw gameplay of those, but yeah, as far as playing it through beginner, it definitely felt like beginner, and I felt like a god, which, I mentioned that, I think, last time or a couple shows ago when we were playing Brave, that I love to just be a dominant character in video games.
Yeah.
It's just my preferred way to enjoy them. But this one, you definitely feel like you are Hercules, which is good. So, and it's a tough thing in general, because if you really think about the true lore of both the movie and the mythology, which I'm not as familiar with the mythology, but like pretty much in the movie, until he makes that deal with Hades, like towards the 3rd act, like he's invincible. Like he's not completely invincible, but he's super overpowered, super strong. Just makes a joke out of all the bosses in the 0 to Hero montage. And so like to put it into a gameplay thing where like a little bird dive bombs you and kills you, like it's a little, you kind of just have to suspend your disbelief or suspend your belief or whatever, like, and just, it's a video game. So all that said, I didn't really have too much of a problem with it on beginner, which I shouldn't have. Seeing people play the medium and Herculean, especially the Herculean, it definitely looks like it presents much more of a challenge, and but not unfairly so. Like I've seen people do not speed runs, but like just kind of long plays where they're not trying to 100% it, but they're just trying to get through it, and it definitely looks challenging in that mode. And like you said, certain enemies are just, you can't avoid them in certain things. Like in is it Thebes, the city level, there's this little dude in not a trash can, he's in like a pillar, but he looks like the cliche homeless guy in a barrel with suspenders, but he like just follows you around and just runs into you, and you just really can't avoid him. It's really annoying.
And the cat on fire, just
that
like
thing when he gets struck by lightning, and just like Sonic the Hedgehog. So yeah, there's a few instances of enemies that are a little unfair, but again, like you said, there's usually, at least in the beginner and I think the medium, there's plenty of Herculade to kind of counteract that. It's just kind of annoying that you can't just be good enough to avoid it unless you memorize the levels.
Right.
It's not so much as your skill as it is just repetition. This is where I died. I need to know to jump here, etc.
Mm-hmm. So real quick, I'm gonna try to just real quickly hit through some things that you can do in this game. There are quite a few collectibles. This is the 90s, and so what's a game without a bunch of collectibles? And it gets a little overwhelming. I did have to pull out my manual just to see what some of the stuff did, because it's not well communicated, and we'll talk about that when we hit level 1. But I'll just kind of briefly explain what some of this stuff does. Obviously, you have a health bar at the top. As we mentioned, Herculade gives you more health. The energy bar can be increased by picking up Hercules action figures, which is cool. You can get a longer health bar, which is neat. Not a lot of games did that.
Yeah, kind of RPG-esque.
Yeah. I don't know if it's permanent or per level. Do you
actually, I'm not sure on that. I didn't really pay that close attention.
It might be. No, because there's a lot of them. I feel like if it was permanent, you'd have a really big health bar. It might be per level. Basically, Hercules' main weapon is a sword, but he also has 2 different punches that he can use. Pretty much nobody uses the punch.
They're-
as far as I could tell.
They're just for environmental stuff, really. Like,
Right.
they're useless against enemies.
Yeah, like there'll be pillars in your way, and so
Yep.
if you hold down your uppercut punch, it like,
Bashes through.
right, it breaks things. He like builds it up, and then you let go, and it goes flying. So,
Yeah.
but really, the sword's the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of different weapon power-ups that you collect. They're known as gifts of the gods. You can find throughout the game, consisting of the lightning sword, which shoots lightning in a direction, the fireball sword, which shoots these fireballs that seek out enemies, and then there's the sonic sword, which shoots a big circular blast around you. Jeff, I don't know about you, but I really only used the lightning.
Yep.
Didn't use as much of the other two. I think you use the L and R buttons to cycle through them.
Yeah.
And then there's a meter that tells you how much you have of it. But even though I used the lightning sword the most, I really only used it on parts where I noticed that there was purposely like a lot of birds, and specifically the last level on easy where you're flying through releasing the gods. I pretty much use that essentially, and you're on Pegasus, and so it just felt like a shoot 'em up level, which was really cool.
Yeah,
so
it reminded me a
there.
lot of the last level of Battletoads Arcade. I don't know if you've played all the way through that, but you can get like a lightning gun that kind of does the exact same thing in that level.
Oh, nice.
It's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird because you have to cycle through. So when you cycle through, you lose your basic sword attack. And so
Yeah.
I never wanted to make myself vulnerable enough that I couldn't just slice at them. And so I didn't find myself using it. And in my head, I'm like, oh, I better save that. And then I would just always save it and never use it. Which
I
is
always have
silly.
that problem in games. I always have that problem.
Yeah. Breath of the Wild, I would always do that. Like, don't use that sword.
Yep.
Save that. And then like a year later, I still have it. I'm like, I should probably just use that.
Yeah.
Moving on, there's also an invincibility power-up that you can find in the form of a helmet, which grants you a few seconds of invulnerability. So you can use that. In many levels, there are in all the levels, there's the Hercules letters, which if you collect them all, they allow the player to spawn directly at the next level instead of starting the game all over from the beginning. Which is nice. That's a cool little mechanic.
It's an interesting take on game overs, yeah.
Yeah. And so there are also 4 hidden vases in each mission that if you collect all of them, you get a password for that current level, which you can use assuming you don't play on a PS2, apparently.
Right, yeah.
So,
or you have a memory card or whatever. I think there was like kind of a if you have a memory card or if you don't with the vases.
Right, which is interesting.
It's very interesting and kind of a sign of the time because memory cards were brand new and they didn't really know what to do with a disc-based system. And I know this is a couple years into the system, but still, it's kind of a sign of the era, kind of leftovers from the NES days before battery backup saves and things like that. So interesting to accommodate both.
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of the stuff you're going to come across.
Yep.
There's also some coins, which I found myself collecting, even though they're virtually
I was going to say, what do you do with those?
I think they just give you points at the end of the level.
Okay.
But you don't spend them. They don't give you extra lives, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I didn't really notice anything.
Actually, how do you get extra lives in this game? Am I missing something?
Extra lives.
I forget.
I do too. I was thinking it was the Hercules figurines, but that's just your health bar.
Apparently.
I don't remember. We're good
So,
hosts.
Well, this game didn't do a good job explaining any of
That
this.
is definitely a good point, and
I mean,
that kind
honestly,
of overlaps into the first level, honestly.
Right, and I could open up the manual right here and read it, but
Sure.
I don't feel like doing that because this game should have educated the player better. Don't just assume we can figure it all out, or we're all going to read the manual. But whatever. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of your the gameplay. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll get to see a lot of it, and unfortunately, you get to see me playing it as well for the first time. So buckle up. Moving on, Jeff, would you like to kind of briefly hit on the story and what your thoughts are with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing here is it follows the movie very closely. Like, obviously, the use of the actual video cutscenes from the movie kind of not just forces that, but just kind of restates that that's what it is. But like each level, as you go through it, are locations from the movie, and then there's always liberties taken in video games, and there's events and things that are either exaggerated, elaborated upon, or just not from the movie. Certain boss fights and things that you maybe just saw a brief clip of in that, like I said, that montage, the Zero to Hero one. But yeah, so basically you do start as adult Herc as he's essentially finishing the training montage. It's the Phil song. What's that song? Year One, Last Hope, and whatever. But it's essentially you start as adult Herc, so there's none of the teenage awkward year Herc or any of the pre-story of pain and panic, turning immortal as a baby, and all that stuff. So I mean, it's worth noting that, I guess. But so you start at that point where you're on Phil's little training island and whatever, and then you kind of progress through the various boss fights of the movie that he tries to become a hero and eventually has to rescue Olympus from Hades and conquer Hades. So I don't know if there's any extra beats beyond that or worth noting. I don't know if you have anything.
Nah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I think you hit it pretty good. Yeah, I mean, the only cool thing I think is that the movie kind of skips over him fighting some of those monsters.
Yeah.
And you kind of already mentioned this, but it's just cool that they're able to be like, hey, we're going to turn that into a boss fight. Or
totally.
two.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so it did allow them to kind of hit some of the areas that, maybe if these movies could have been longer, they could have fit into the movie, but obviously you only have so much time. So Zero to Hero, man, just skip ahead, I guess. But so yeah, the story very faithful to the movie, not really original in any way, which is fine.
Oh yeah,
totally. It's a tie-in, and that's totally cool. So
yeah,
yeah. So that kind of covers the story more or less.
Yep.
And so moving on, we have our levels to hit through. So we'll just kind of bring them up. Jeff, if you have anything to say, feel free to throw in your 2 cents. We're probably going to be on this first level for a while because I was also on the first level for way longer than I should have ever been. Yeah. And I don't know. You might be listening at home and going, well, you're just stupid and you should have figured it out better.
Right.
But I'll just start by saying there's literally no explanation as to what your goal is. I think they maybe briefly mention what, because the level is called your basic DID, which is damsel in distress. And so really the point of the level, besides getting from the left to the right, is saving these damsels in distress. And they're basically these cloth ragdoll women that Hercules has to save. And so you have to
as seen in the movie.
As seen in the movie, yes. And so you have to do different tasks to get them, and then only then are you allowed to progress through the level. Yeah. And so it took me a while just to figure out that was what I was missing. I'm like, why can't I move on? Well, you have to slash all the target bad guys and get the girls and get the girl. I'm like, okay. Mm-hmm. So that was frustrating right off the bat. But eventually you kind of get the hang of it and you're able to kind of keep moving through. Eventually they start showing you enemies in the background. And I'm like, all right, so clearly there's a way to get to them, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. Until at one point I had just flat out hit a part in the level where I could not figure out how to progress. This was kind of like a dumb part on my end, and also the game's fault. But there's these giant boulders you have to pick up by holding over on them for long enough that he picks it up. And then you can throw them at the enemies in the background, which I thought was what I needed to do to be able to progress.
Right, it seemed logical.
Turns out you don't even have to kill them. You just take the boulder over to the side and jump on the boulder and use it as a platform to progress. And so, it took me forever to figure out that I could throw the boulders, and then B, it took me forever trying to hit some of the targets in the background, because some of them you just can't hit. He just throws it over them. And so I'm sitting there retrying this over and over again, and it's so slow. And eventually I just had to look it up, and I'm like, oh, idiot. You can just jump on the rock.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit my fault, a little bit just the game not doing a good job. Another mechanic in this game that I didn't mention is you can like ground pound.
Oh, yeah.
And in this level, there's these rocks these big old like mountain face rock areas that you walk over. And at certain points, there's like these minor cracks in them. And if you ground pound, you can break through. And that's where like a lot of the Hercules letters and some of the vases and stuff are.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't seen somebody do that, I would never have known that was a thing to do, because the way you do a ground pound is it's not something you just come across.
Not super intuitive, no.
Totally. And then the fact that you can break through these like mountain things, and they use it in later levels too. I would never have known. Yep. Maybe eventually looking at the cracks, I might have been like, oh, maybe I can. But it's just, come on, like throw up a little speech bubble. Let Phil talk.
Yeah.
Other than the Danny DeVito lines, throw up some dialogue boxes, and tell me what I can do when I need to do it. So I even know. It's frustrating. What do you think, Jeff?
No, I pretty much totally agree. This level suffers from a lack of tutorial, and I know, in this day and age, tutorials have almost become a bad word, because there's a lot of games where they hold your hand and don't let you play and don't let you progress until you do them. At the same time, in this era, there's certain ones like. An excellent example, in my opinion, is Banjo-Kazooie's Spiral Mountain area. You have the option to do the tutorial if you're not familiar with the game, or you can skip it if you are already familiar. And it teaches you how to do each move in the game that's available at the time, and when to use it and why, and all the button combinations, everything you need to know. This game does not do that. It just, like you said, it just expects you to either read the instruction booklet, which again, it's the old school, new school. This is that transitional period in gaming between the two, the instruction manual versus the in-game tutorial. So, you have to forgive it and the designers for, not, I don't want to say not knowing, like they had to have known, but like just not doing anything about it. But it's even if you go as far back as like the original Mario Brothers and Miyamoto's design principles with that, if you break down World 1-1 in Super Mario Brothers, it literally teaches you by force how to do each move, what to do, how to kill enemies. Either it kills you right off the bat and respawns you immediately if the Goomba hits you right off the bat, or you learn how to jump and smash it because you've got bricks over your head that force you onto it. The first gap you jump over has a floor, so you learn to jump over a gap, but you don't, have the risk of dying. Whereas the second gap is a death pit. So like, they could have implemented a lot of that, like you said, adding in speech bubbles or voice clips of Phil saying, "You need to take out all the targets," or whatever, or even just when there's, let's say, the ground pound thing. They should have put a wall and made it so you had to ground pound and made it obvious, like to highlight the crack or put like you said, a speech. There's just certain design elements that are missing to force you to learn the mechanics. And so I agree. This level is lacking in that regards. There's also a couple issues with the sprites moving in 3D space. So there's a couple of the those beanbag target things. They're spinning like around a central point, like a carousel type thing, and you have to swipe at just the right timing. But again, because they're 2D sprites, it's kind of hard to gauge where they're at in space and when to swing your sword and how long it takes you to swing your sword. And so it's a lot of trial and error with that. And so there's
I agree.
There's
I struggled
several
with that too.
times where they're like other times where they're not spinning, but like they're zipping from foreground to background, and you just kind of have to time your sword. So lots of little things like that. But I mean,
I definitely agree.
That's a nitpick right there, because it's not the worst thing in the world with that, but lots of little things that kind of add up to make it an annoying introductory level where rather than teaching you the game, it just sort of like dumps the game on you, and like you said, it takes a long time to kind of figure it out on your own, whereas some really simplistic design decisions could have solved a lot of that.
Totally.
And I'm off my soapbox.
Okay. And I think thematically it works. Like, I think it's a cool level.
Yeah.
It makes sense that the opening level should be you learning the game just like Hercules is learning to be a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I think the beanbag enemies on these weird contraptions is visually like fun to look at. It's cool.
Yeah.
It gives them an opportunity to kind of show off the hardware more or less. But like Jeff said, there's things that aren't really making it fire on all cylinders. So it's cool. There's sharks jumping at you. You're climbing over things. Like, it's fun. There's a lot to it. The music is literally from that scene, so it works thematically. But some of the other things I think are.
And once you know the game or once you replay it, it's a lot more fun, and it's like, oh yeah, I know what to do here, and I know.
Right.
But yeah, it's that first time playing that's kind of the roughest.
Totally. And so that's more where I'm coming from, is just that
absolutely
first experience. It's a little rough.
Yeah.
But I'm sure people who grew up playing this love, just whizzing through it, know exactly what to do, where to ground pound, good times. So moving on from there, we have the next level, which is the Hero's Gauntlet, which, if you remember from the movie, there's a part at the very end of Phil's song where Hercules has to platform across these things to get to the mentioned damsel in distress doll at the very end of the level. So this level takes that part from the movie and makes it super duper long. And this it's like we mentioned, it's a little difficult to kind of
gauge
that's the word I was looking for. Gauge the depth. They did provide shadows and things to try to make it easier, but still a little difficult. But it's a good introduction to the Hercules rushing forward. You're looking at him at his back, and then he's definitely a 2D sprite, and then there's some 3D stuff going on. So I appreciate the change. It's not all side scroller left or right. They've added this different thing that they use throughout the game, and so for that I like it. There's not a lot of instant death moments in this. There are some in some of the later levels, which make it a little more difficult. But for the most part, you feel like you're in control. Some of the time, it's hard to get Hercules from one side of the screen to the other. I've noticed if you pull back on the directional pad, you do get maybe a little extra correction time. But for the most part, it's... if you're not looking far ahead for when things pop in, you're going to miss stuff. And so you got to really be paying attention. You can jump around, but really not necessary. And you can't attack really in this either. So it's mostly just running. So, and jumping.
One interesting thing is that there is multiple splits in the path to go left or right. And, didn't really go through and check each side, and I don't know if like one's easier or harder or anything like that, or if they're completely different, or if they're just like the same but mirrored. I have no idea. I don't know. Did you investigate those at all?
No, and that's it's totally like a Crash Bandicoot thing now that you mention it. Which is interesting. So, I mean, no, I didn't check to see how they differed, but. I assume they're probably pretty similar, but there might be collectibles in there that you can only get if you go one way, which would be annoying to have to.
Yeah.
But you can't really pick your level, so once you beat the level, you can't go back unless you basically start over, I guess, or put a password in. So they're probably pretty similar, I would imagine. I doubt that they would hide certain things on different routes, but it is interesting to think about.
And the other thing is just graphically, like there's limited draw distance for especially this hardware, the PlayStation 1. So like there's a lot of pretty severe pop in, which is just ugly as heck.
Yeah.
But the idea is if you're focused on Hercules and where he is, you don't really notice it. But like if you're watching somebody play, it's super noticeable.
Yeah. So following that, we have the Centaur's Forest is the next level. Lots of pretty green colors in this level. Definitely pulled, straight from the movie. Feels very accurate. This is your typical left to right, jumping around. I did not realize you could climb up trees in this game,
Oh.
but apparently they hide a lot of letters up there.
Yeah.
I believe this is the first level where you find the big chubby dad mustache guy that wants to shank you, and so he's here.
Call him a ruffian. Tangled
he's-
reference. Ruffians in the woods.
That's right. Good one.
Thanks.
Trying to think other like significant things that happen in this level. It's pretty straightforward.
It's kind of a
boss.
classic. I wouldn't say platform, but like a classic side-scrolling action level.
Yeah.
There's several occasions where enemies are like hiding in the bushes or behind trees and stuff, and it's kind of annoying, but you know, you can get over that.
This level definitely plays more on the foreground background thing where you can't just keep holding over right. You got to move up and down. I mean, there's some earlier levels that the earlier level, the first level does a little bit of it maybe, but this one really is pretty heavy on it.
Yeah.
And then the following level does as well. So.
Yeah. You know what else this level has?
What?
Water and waterfalls and reflections.
Oh, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Oh,
Jeff?
you bet your butt I'm going to.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's different points where you kind of wade through water, or there's like waterfalls in the background. The water's really cool because it reflects the environment, but it looks really weird because it doesn't reflect the characters, in my opinion. So you've got like the reflection of the banks and the rocks and everything happening, but then Hercules just doesn't have a reflection, so he's clearly a vampire.
Of course.
No, the other visual effect that I kind of like is as you move through the plains, there's sort of, I don't know if it's like a fogging or a lighting effect that kind of happens in some places where it kind of highlights the focus of the active plane, which I think this is an excellent design decision because it does help you focus on what is in your plane of play. I don't know if you noticed that, or if it's really as pronounced as I think it is, or if it's kind of just the sizing of elements, but
I didn't notice.
Okay. I always perceived there to be kind of like a dulling of the colors of planes that are further back, and then if you move into them, they kind of take on the brighter characteristics, but
Right.
I may have just made that up in my head, so
Well, there you go. No, yeah. I wouldn't doubt your head. It's a very smart head.
oh, well, thank you.
So, at the end of this level, you hit your first boss, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
His name is Nessus. Nessus, I think is how it's pronounced. And he's a centaur from the movie, hitting on good old Meg. And so it's your job to go in there and show him who's boss, damsel in distress.
That's right.
Honestly, he's pretty easy if you know how to beat him. I think I died the first time because I was just going in there trying to fight him and realized I wasn't doing any damage to him. But basically what you have to do is go to the left and basically get out of his reach, more or less. And you still kind of have to dodge his shots, though. And then he eventually gets tired of kicking a stone wall, and then he turns around and you jump on his back and ride him like a rodeo horse. And apparently that hurts him. And then eventually he gets stunned, and you do the classic build up the punch and punch him up into the air, and then he falls down, and his horseshoes land on his head, just like in the movie. So that part really felt like it was
authentic.
a really good. Yeah, it was very authentic.
Yeah.
Even did the thing where the last horseshoe down, lands on the bump on his head, and like a game of horseshoes or
very
whatever.
Warner Brothers-esque, but
yes,
very, old school Disney too. The Mickey Mouse cartoons, and it's in the movie.
Yeah,
I will walk back my previous statement. So when Herc is jumping in the air, he does have a reflection in the water, but when he's standing in the water, he doesn't.
All right. I'm glad we clarified that.
Yeah, just in case anybody was really worried about that.
Right. We have some people that are really checking everything we say on the show, so we have to be careful.
Somebody who's like a huge fan of this is just screaming at their podcast listening device right now.
No,
you guys are idiots. So where do we go next?
That not a like a super standout level, but whatever.
Yeah.
So following that, we are in the Big Olive, which I totally get that joke right now, but I don't.
Yep.
Is that referenced in the movie? Did they call it that?
I think Phil might, because there's a lot of parallels drawn to New York City. And
right.
So, I can't place it in my head, but I almost feel like it's as they're approaching. But it is the city of Thebes or Thebes.
Thebes. Yeah.
So, but yeah, a lot of New York jokes. The guy trying to sell sundials by opening his trench coat and all that stuff. And
I'm walking here.
Yeah, he's faithfully. Yeah, all that stuff. So.
Yes, and so as within the movie, Hercules shows up, and there's all these people the poor people that have been traumatized by all these different things, and so it's this weird mixture of friendly NPCs mixed in with non-friendly NPCs, I guess.
Yeah, with Uncle Shank.
Yeah, and like, oh, I'm a cat and I get struck by lightning, and then all of a sudden
I hurt you.
Have fire. I hurt you. Yes,
yeah.
and so it's a little interesting, but still not a bad level as you kind of make your way through the city. This is where they introduce these poles that hang out, and you have to spin and jump off them. Whoever invented this
Aladdin
mechanic, yeah. Whoever invented this mechanic, I really don't like them because they're just never fun in games. If you ask me, it's like, here's 13 poles, get to the top, and if you mess up at all, you have to start all the way at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And I spent forever doing one in this level, and come to find out it was just to get some collectibles that I didn't care about.
Oh man!
And I was like, well, that was a waste of time. I assumed I needed to go that way for the level, and so. Stuff like that was a little frustrating.
The mechanic works in some games when it's done to kind of almost cheat, like as long as you're holding left and you hit the button, it'll get you to where you're supposed to go. But like ones like this where it's like it's a little more, I don't know if it's physics based, but yeah, like you have to time it and get it just right and all that. It's a pain for sure.
Yeah. But this level also requires you moving from the foreground to the background a lot, working your way to the right. I realized later on that it, mostly if you stayed toward the front of the level was the true path. And so it made it a little bit easier to get through to the end. If you went up higher was where the collectibles and
Okay.
And so that's the thing with this game is if you're like just wanting to play through it really quick, you could, if you know the right way, you could just fly through some of these levels, some of them. And then if you want to get everything, you've got to spend more time. And so some of them take a long time if you're trying to find everything.
Especially if you don't know where to look.
Right, especially if you have no idea where it is. So once you get to the end of this level, finally the throwing mechanic that I mentioned earlier, where you're throwing stuff into the background, finally comes into play when you fight a I don't know what that thing is.
That's the one I referenced earlier. That's kind of like a bull that's throwing stuff at you.
Yeah, and so
like some sort of Greek creature.
Yeah, and so you throw stuff back at him, and eventually you kill him. As he falls down the stairs after you kill him, he can still hurt you, which
that's obnoxious. Yeah.
So stupid. I'm like, really? He's done. Like, come on, really, game. But not the end of the world. So overall, okay level. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this level? It's
not in particular. I actually like the look of it. I think it's visually good. It makes the city feel big, and especially with all the layers. And then when you kind of get to the top or the back, there's a pretty painted background and kind of shows more of the city going off into the hills. And I like it. And there's some really cool like like the classic Greek pillar structures that are like gold plated, and it looks cool. It's like a mock New York with like some, instead of graffiti, there's like these posters on the wall, and it's kind of garbage along the base of the walls and stuff. So it's I appreciate it. I appreciate the design of it.
Definitely. So following that, I guess there's a second Big Olive level, part 2. I imagine that's maybe they cut that in half at that boss that I mentioned. Some more of the same, which I guess makes it Makes it feel a little bit longer. Okay. And so eventually you get to another boss battle of sorts where there's these evil bird things that try to carry the townspeople away. And so it's your job to protect them, to keep them from taking them all, even though, as far as I could tell, there is no punishment for them taking them. They just kind of take them to the background and drop them off, and then they run away. But this is where your lightning and other power-ups that you get are definitely come into play and make things a little bit easier. So eventually you beat that, and thank goodness these levels are over. Just, I don't know, just not my favorite part. But finally you get to like the good part of the game, which is Hydra Canyon. Jeph, I know you mentioned a little bit of it earlier, but why don't you take over on this one?
Yeah, and so this one, it literally just drops you into a boss fight, which again, like the only thing in the movie would be Hercules sort of rescuing the little kid versions of Pain and Panic, so it's not like it's skipping that much. So it drops you right into the boss fight of that. It's in a perspective where you're essentially in a half circle, I think, around the Hydra. The Hydra's rendered in this big, giant polygon that takes up like the whole screen. It starts with the one head, and then obviously as you cut off one head, it gets more and more and more. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the gameplay for this boss fight is really simplistic. It's just kind of a jump dodge and then turn around and slash. I feel like they could have, I don't know, come up with something a little more complicated than that in a good way, but it's okay. It's visually stunning. It's got like lightning flashes that illuminate the screen and kind of affect everything, and occasionally there's rocks that'll fall, so you got to avoid that as well.
Right.
So you just kind of keep hacking and slashing until is it until a rock falls, or do you have to do something to trigger the rock to fall, the big one on the Hydra? I feel like you just kind of keep slashing and then a big rock falls, right?
Well, yeah, they do have a health bar, and so I think you just
okay, that's what it is.
Off.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So when the health bar reaches 0, a giant rock falls, which, in the movie Hercules is in their hand and he hits the canyon wall. In this, it doesn't have the memory or whatever to do it. So it's just when it reaches 0, you see the big rock fall and crush it, and then Herc does his classic end of level drink his Herculade. But it's a very visually stunning level in my opinion, especially for PS1. So
yeah. No, I totally agree. I think visually this is like the coolest part of the game. There's a reason they put it on the cover. I think they knew what they were doing. I think they realized like this is pretty cool, and so I did notice the performance drops a little bit after you get a lot of heads on the screen. And so it was lagging a little bit. Some frame skips or whatever, but overall not bad. I agree with you. I think they could have done more with it, but maybe they were just trying to make it work with what they
There's a lot going on there.
But yeah, really, the more heads there were, it didn't really make it that much more difficult.
No, only one really attacks at a time.
Right, the heads only attack you if you're standing right in front of them, so you really aren't getting multiple. Whereas Kingdom Hearts, I think, does a much better job with it.
Okay.
Obviously, they had a lot. Yeah, you get to fight the same boss, and
nice.
it's much more challenging, and obviously it's a later console game, and you can do a little more with it. But for the time, this was super cool, and I was really impressed with this level, at least visually.
It's also a giant boss for the time, because that wasn't super common yet. It's very God of War-ish, and like we were talking about earlier. It's a big epic boss. It's cool.
Totally, I definitely agree. Immediately following that, you get to go to Medusa's lair, which we don't really see in the movie, as we mentioned. Basically back-to-back boss fights. I appreciate that they didn't throw in a bunch of like BS
superfluous platforming in between.
Like here's one where Hercules is running to the right in a sunset. And you're just like, okay. So honestly, I'd rather just go boss battle to boss battle, because it kind of follows the storyline.
I think they could have done something funny with him, like avoiding his like rabid fangirls, but like that would have again been superfluous. But it would have fit within the timing of the movie. But tonally probably wouldn't have worked too well.
Right. So in this boss fight, you are running in a full circle around Medusa, and she shoots lasers out of her eyes, as everyone knows Medusa for her laser vision. And then her snakes also shoot poison. But basically, you knock a mirror over on a pillar, and then you hide behind the mirror, and it shoots it back at her, and you have to do it for every pillar.
There's a lot of pillars.
Yeah, a lot of
12?
pillars.
I don't know, 10 or 12.
Something like that. And you fight off skeletons while doing this. Most of her attacks are pretty easy to dodge. The only one that is, as far as I can tell, impossible to completely dodge is she does a ground pound and stuff falls from the sky, and it's just
so
like
annoying.
Impossible. No matter which way you go, you get hit by something, so it's inevitable.
Yep.
And so I don't know what the design choice on that
was. We've mentioned that earlier in the episode where it's just designed where you have to, like earlier it was like you have to learn to memorize when to jump and stuff, so it's not your skill, it's your memorization. This one is just unfair.
Right. Yeah. And so, but really not a hard level overall.
No. And there's plenty of Hercules when you kill the skeletons and stuff.
Totally.
So.
Yeah. So, cool. Glad they added it. Not a bad boss fight.
Not terrible, no.
Then we move on to the longest level of my life, except maybe the first level, which is the Cyclops attacks.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, you are Hercules, who is supposed to be weak and without his power.
Touché.
But you are also, so maybe that explains why the crowd's hurting you so much. But you also can like run through walls if you get the sandal power up. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
I guess don't overthink it. But as you're running through the town, the townsfolk are running in the opposite direction, and if you let them, they will hit you and hurt you. And so more often than not, you're just dodging them, and they're everywhere. There's tons of them.
Yeah.
And they repeat the same character models about every 3 seconds.
There's like only 4 or 5 of them. It sucks.
Some of them, it looks like they maybe changed their outfit colors, but other than that, pretty much the same.
And then occasionally there's an intersection where a carriage, like a chariot, will go cut through, and gotta avoid that. And pillars fall in.
And so you're just jumping over things, slowing down, speeding up, and no matter how much you run, he just stays the same distance away. Which is whatever. It's still kind of a cool effect. The thing that annoys me is if you put the shoes on, you can run through walls, but you can still get hurt by
I don't get
the
that.
people, and so it's not really invincible. It's a little weird.
It is.
But another run level. I died on this one because there's some areas where it just seemed unfair. How the hit detection worked and everything. And then there's also these parts where the ground falls out from under you and you have to jump across a pit. And if you don't jump it, you instantly die. That's where I think I first died, actually, now that I think about it. And that's the first insta-death that I've found in this game that I can remember. And as kind of annoying. I think I died there twice before I finally got across. Like, it's not even that hard, but I just kept messing it up.
Understanding the timing and the depth perception and all that, it's annoying.
Totally. So, interesting level nonetheless. I'm glad it's there, but still kind of, there's some things about it that are a little frustrating. So after you beat that, you get to the next level, which is Titan Fight, which if you play on the easy mode is the final level in the game, where you, as I mentioned earlier, are on Pegasus and you're moving left to right, so it's kind of got a shoot 'em up feel to it. I thought this level was actually kind of neat because while you're flying around and fighting all these bad guys, you see the Titans off in the background, and so as you're cycling through them, you get these different attacks. The rock guy throws a bunch of rocks at you, and so it's cool seeing them off in the background, and they didn't have to bring them up in front of the game. But basically, if you just don't get killed by them, I guess more or less you destroy them. But what I thought was really cool is throughout the level, the different gods that have been chained up by Hades, you can fly by them and basically free them. And so it was, I don't know, I just really dug that about the level. It just, I was like, I remember when the movie he shows up and like frees everybody. And so I felt like even though they don't explain to you, free them. And I'm pretty sure even if you don't, you still beat the level.
Right.
But it's just a cool little thing that you do. And I think maybe they they either help you or give you something. I don't know.
I'm not
I
sure.
feel like
yeah.
there's a reason to free them, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So what? Any thoughts?
The only thing is like the geometry on this one is the clouds. So it's like you are on Mount Olympus. Obviously, that's where the gods live. And so it's kind of got Zeus's cloud geometry as seen in the movie. So that's pretty cool as well. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, totally. So as you fly through, you hit all of them, or you go through all of the guys, and then eventually get to the end of the level where you come across your father, who obviously is Zeus, and you free him. And then if you're on easy mode, game's over, you win, yay! But if you play on the higher levels, you get 2 more levels, as I mentioned. Next one being Passageway of Eternal Torments, which is a really intense name for a level.
Well, it's literally a little delve into heck.
Right, yeah, going down to get Hades.
Yep.
Which is kind of weird because in the easy mode, that's where it ends, and so you assume that Zeus kind of makes things right. But I mean, they literally show you the scene where Meg gets a pillar dropped on her, and you're like, so did she survive?
She okay?
I guess we figured it out. Whatever. Yeah. So this level is another run forward rush level, I guess is what Jeff's calling them.
It's what it's described as in the wiki. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Rush level, yeah. So this one is in hell, as we mentioned. Hades is kind of like flying above you and like dropping these fireballs at you. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more skeletons that are trying to get you, as well as like ghost souls. Which I guess makes sense because their souls are heading down to below or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty creepy level, honestly, overall.
Yeah, it is.
Music's a little more
very dark.
Yeah. A lot more platforming, a lot of areas where you can fall down.
Yeah, into the River of Souls or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. And so cool attention to detail on that. I'm trying to think if there was anything else.
There's a couple of fire-breathing dragons that you kind of have to avoid and get your timing to pass or jump or whatever. But yeah, nothing much beyond that. It's just there's some of the platforming towards the end of it where it's kind of you got to really go back and forth and time your jumps, and it's like successively like 3 or 4 in a row, and so
yeah.
Other than that, yeah, it's pretty much like the other ones, just a little harder.
So then once you get to the end of that level, there isn't a boss as far as I'm aware, and you hit the final level, the final level, which is the Vortex of Souls, where Hercules in the movie goes in and basically pulls Meg out. And so it's the Hades battle.
Yeah.
The one we've all been wanting. Like I mentioned, I never played this, so I can't speak too much into it. One of the reviewers that we both watched basically said that this boss was a joke, and can be beat in like under 3 minutes or something because you just keep following Hades around and slashing at him.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
So again, like I mentioned, I didn't ever fight it either, but just watching it and seeing multiple people just kind of make easy work of him, it's like, I feel like they could have done a little bit more with the design here to make it a little more challenging or something, but there's a lot of moving stuff on screen to avoid, but then there's power-ups and different things that drop, so it never really seems to get too out of hand from what I can tell. Just kind of follow him, like you said, and slash him, and he doesn't really avoid your attacks. He doesn't really, you know what I mean? He kind of just flies to a ledge, and then you just swing at him. There's not like any sort of timing necessary. There's not any other stuff, because like even with the Hydra, you had to have the good timing to hit his head right as it's in the right position. Whereas here, it's just any time you get near him, you can hit him. So yeah, it whatever. It has a cool transparency effect with like the green smoke in the foreground, and then the kind of spirits in the background. So like there's some cool visual elements to it. But yeah, overall, I don't think it doesn't look like a super challenging fight.
Yeah, I agree. I could probably have taken him, I think.
Totally.
So at the end of the level, you have finally beaten the game, and they do cue the final cutscene. Hercules goes up to Mount Olympus. I don't know, what does he do, Jeff? Doesn't he say no thanks and like go back down?
Yeah, he's like, I can't imagine not being with Meg, or my place is here on Earth, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the game, it's over, and we get some gospel music. Phil makes out with this god lady, and
Yeah.
Hercules in the stars. That's Phil's boy.
That's right.
Which we don't understand the reference if you haven't seen the movie when you're playing this game, because you're like, oh,
They've
okay.
skipped that scene. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. But no, it's cool that the end of the movie is literally in the game. That's cool.
Yeah.
I can dig that. And so then you get your credits.
Yep.
Jeph sits around and watches, and I go
Yep.
about my day and ignore the credits altogether.
Yeah.
So,
That's true.
bless my soul.
Can't say there's anything
Goes on
super
around.
interesting except like it obviously that we do confirm that all the original voice actors are credited, and
Nice. Okay.
whether like this is one of those things where I don't know if it was they used them without permission and this is around that time where that kind of became an issue, or if they all were fully on board, because it's weird that this one had everybody. And it has a pretty decent all-star cast with Danny DeVito and James Woods and Rip Torn and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas like the Tarzan, their next game from the same studio, like not a whole lot of official voice work in that one. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
There is a lot more original voice clips in that one, like Olive Turk's training tutorials and stuff like that. So
Right.
maybe it's because they needed so much more rather than just being able to pull from the source. Like, I don't know. Doesn't matter.
And hey, maybe they realized after this game, like, hey, we can't just pull all the voice clips from the movie. We need to have original stuff. We're
Mhm.
not doing a good job of telling people how to play the game, so we need more
Let's
voice.
make a tutorial. Yeah, which obviously we can say Tarzan did a lot better with the tutorial than this one.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So
But regardless, still
Yeah.
a cool game.
it is. Yeah.
It's interesting that this never came to like the N64.
Yeah.
This was, kind of exclusive, at least on console. It was exclusive to the PlayStation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there was a reason. If
Right.
somehow PlayStation had something set up where they had the exclusive rights, like we want a game to ourselves, or what?
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, it's like technologically speaking, I can't imagine that this wouldn't have been able to be easily ported. But, because it's
Yeah.
like, again, comparing it to Tarzan has like all 3D elements, whereas this one's got sprites. Maybe the N64 just struggled with sprites, and I think the N64 is famous for the, I think it's called the texture filter, where it blurs sprites. So like,
Right.
like the race cars in Mario Kart look really blurry. On a high def TV. Maybe it just didn't look right when they tried it, or maybe their team wasn't big enough and that this game did well enough that they had the resources to port it for Tarzan, for the sequel. I mean, for all intents and
Yeah.
purposes, that is the sequel.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing that it wasn't on all systems.
Yeah, and it's probably unfortunate because I most likely would have played it had it been on
Oh,
N64.
totally. Yeah, I feel like I would have.
But I'm glad that we finally got around to check it out. So,
Yeah.
Jeph, final thoughts. Rate it, whatever. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts? What do you think overall?
Overall, I really like the game. I think it's beautiful. I really do think it's aged well visually, even if it is a little rough around the edges because of the age. I think the art style helps it tremendously. And the gameplay is solid overall. Like the jumping and all that is good. It's a little floaty, but I know you prefer that.
Yeah.
But it's pretty forgiving. There's some frustrating moments, like we said. The opening level doesn't really teach you the game, and then some of the later mechanics, it's just like I'm not really sure what to do, or this is unfair, or this this thing keeps hitting me. But the pacing's a little weird too, where you kind of got those boss rushes like right at the end. But it's overall an enjoyable experience. It's a great little platforming game. It's very faithful to the source material, and high production value. So I would recommend playing this.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think if you're a fan of the movie and you haven't played this, it's a great companion to the movie, and you feel like you're kind of playing through the movie, which is, I think, the ultimate goal with these tie-ins. And I think it's great. I think visually really cool. They did some unique things that not a lot of games were doing. Side scrollers weren't very popular at this point, and so it was cool that they did this. Music's good overall. It's rougher to play when you don't know what's going on. Probably would be much more enjoyable on a second playthrough. If you are checking this out, might be worth watching a little bit on YouTube before you dive in just to kind of get an idea of the flow of things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Overall, I like it. It's a cool game. It's unique because it's on PlayStation 1, so maybe not as accessible nowadays, but I was still able to grab a copy on eBay, a good copy, a good, complete copy, and didn't break the bank at all.
I did confirm that it's still available to purchase for PS3 and Vita, so digitally.
Oh,
so
okay.
yeah, I mean, it's still there, listed on the store and everything. It's $6 US.
Wow.
So
well, there you
I'd say go get it, man.
Yeah, I probably, honestly, if I'd known that, I probably would have just got it that way.
I know,
it looks way better.
Yeah, if my PS3 hadn't died on me like a month ago, I would have totally gotten it that way. So
yeah.
Oh well.
All right. Well, that's cool. It's not very often these older games that we're talking about are still. I mean, you can't play them on
especially
PS4,
Sony exclusive. Yeah,
right.
Sony's definitely not as into backwards compatibility as Nintendo and Microsoft are.
Yes. But here we go, covering another non-Nintendo game for another week. With the Nintendo. Sorry, guys.
So what site are we found on, Clay?
Yes. So, guys, close off here. Thanks so much for joining us. If you made it this long, I did not expect us to spend an hour and a half on this game.
Yeah,
we were flying at the beginning, and then I don't know. It's just how we are. We dive deep. So, guys. We are a part of a website called thenintendovillage.com. If you go there, you can find links to all of our episodes, as well as other great shows. We do reviews for Nintendo games, as well as there's some other great shows and other content there. Our episodes on there are also on their YouTube page for Nintendo Village. So if you want to see gameplay footage while we're talking through these games, if you go to the Nintendo Village YouTube, we post them there as well. I would also remind you that we are on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever it's called. So if you'd like to listen to your podcast, we are there. So check us out. Until next time, guys, next episode, we are taking a look at a Game Boy game. Another Mickey game. We're doing, we try to space these Mickey games out, but this one's been a long time coming. So next episode, we are taking a look at Mickey's Dangerous Chase. So until then, guys, have a great day.
That's right, and go put the glad in Gladiator. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and visit thenintendovillage.com, your home for everything Nintendo.